late afternoon. Welcome, welcome. This is Lee Ankrum from the Ankrum Institute. I'm going to be talking about I am going to be talking about sinuses and crowded teeth, and you're probably wondering why I've put those two together. Well, part of it is because two different people actually asked me to talk about. Two different people asked me, one person asked me to talk about teeth crowding, and another person asked me to talk about sinuses and so forth, or high palates. That's what they asked for, about high palates. So let's talk about the palates at first before we talk about sinuses, and then you'll see how they can actually have a relationship together. I have lots of pictures and some bones to show you. Okay, so the hard palate is made up of, it's this bone called the maxilla. This is us looking up into the mouth from the bottom up. Here's the maxilla. If you see this little joint right here, they actually call that a suture, is that the maxilla has two parts to it. So there's two parts to the maxilla. Now, the interesting thing about the maxilla is that when we were all developing in the room, the maxilla was actually, if I can get my hand in here, four parts. So it isn't this back part that you're seeing. These are different bones called the palatine bones. Where it is that it was four bones was right across here. Right across here was each part. So this was maxilla bone, this was maxilla bone, here and here. So we had a four-part maxillary bone, okay? And it fuses. So this part fuses. That is why you see so many people have so much crowding, especially on those sides there, right where the fusion happened. And there can be extra tension within that place that it fused, okay? Which is, once again, why we see so much of teeth crowding happening here. Now, I'm not suggesting that it doesn't happen elsewhere. I'm not suggesting that. One of the biggest reasons why we tend to have a lot of teeth crowding, and let me show you the maxilla bone. So here's one half of what a maxilla bone, here's one half of what a maxilla bone sort of looks like. That's the inside. I'm showing you this so that you can see the sinus. Here is the sinus inside the maxillary bone. Now, the deal is with high palates and crowded teeth is that most often what they're coming from is when coming through the birth canal, what happens is that there's a squeeze. Let me grab, pardon me for getting out of the screen here. So let me grab here is my skull showing you, here's the maxilla, and this is the bones at the back of the red bones. I don't know why they did these red and this one red, because those are two different bones. So here each side has a palatine. Now what happens coming through the birth canal is that the head gets squeezed, and we can end up with a really high palate, or we can end up with a low palate. The low palate is because all of these, I should step back further so you can really see. So it's all of these bones, which I'm going to show you all the relationship of all of these bones together. But what happens is pushing on your forehead bone, which is also your frontal bone. So pushing on the frontal bone takes all of these bones, and I'm going to show you the inside, the bones inside and everything. I'm going to show all those to you. And what it does is it pushes it all down and actually creates a lower palate. It happens just as much that all of us have lower palates as we have high palates. So high palates is not just like the most common. It's actually I want to tell you something, is that low palates, actually palates getting pushed down, are much more common than they are the higher palates. As I find, I work on a tremendous number of babies, and I see that more often than not. Either way, whether it's a high palate or a low palate, one of the things that can happen is that the sucking, latching and sucking can definitely be off. Today I'm not thinking well, so I hope I can make sense for this next little while. Anyway, so we're looking at We're looking at these high and low palates. Now that does not dictate crowding. Crowding, well, let me say, oh, how do I want to say this? Is you can have crowding on either one. That's what I'm trying to say, is I can have crowding with a low palate, tension with a low palate, and I can have tension with a high palate and creating a crowding situation. The more narrow, especially if somebody has had something like forceps, or they went into the birth canal and they get stuck there, their head gets stuck there, mom is narrow, or mom doesn't open well, all of these things can create this narrowness in the palate, okay? And so some of the outcomes can be that they don't get their teeth as early. You know, there'll be one of those some of those babies that will get their teeth a little bit later. There'll be babies that maybe get their teeth their teeth won't fall out as early. It'll take much longer. You know, one of the things that happens, and I just worked on a young boy today, is that once you treat and get the tension out of the palate and around the teeth, then what can happen is that they catch up, they lose their teeth and catch up. So you know, I'll definitely talk about that. So when the little boy that I treated, he is 10 and hasn't lost very many of his teeth. Well, after I treated him the second time, he lost 3 within the first week after. The baby teeth, he lost 3 baby teeth. So, you know, and one of the deals is with, somebody just asked me about a posterior birth, meaning that the baby is flipped, and what impact does it have? So, okay, so let's talk about this. I'll step back so you guys can see. Okay, if mom's pelvis is here in the front, then what happens, as we know, is that as the baby is coming through, the back of their head is to the front of mom. So the back of the head is towards mom's pubic bones. But if I'm having a baby that's coming out sunny side up, then of course the facial bones, all of these bones of the face, are coming down. And what you get in that kind of a birth a lot is a drag either across the frontal bone. Let me turn it over so it's not so confusing to you. Is that you'll get a drag on the frontal bone and you get dragging on these facial bones. So I have felt a lot of posterior birth, had a lot of posterior births, and one of the deals is that it tends to feel on those children, those people, well, because it's a lot of children, it tends to feel on people like my face does not fit into the back of my head. I hope that makes sense. So what it feels like on those births is that this part does not feel like it's sitting correctly into that part. So the front of me, my face, this is my face, should feel like, whoops, I'm so sorry guys, should feel like they fit together and they're a whole. Well, in those sunny side up bursts, what it feels like is that the face does not sit into the whole of it. So you definitely get, you definitely get a lot of compressions. And you know what's super interesting, and I'm definitely off track here, but who cares, is what's super interesting is the fact that in those bursts, one of the big things that happens is that the palate, these two maxillary bones actually go backwards. So you have somebody who what you think is happening is that their jaw is coming too far forward. But in actuality, it's because the maxilla, both sides of the maxilla, is actually been pushed back. So it's, that's that thing where you have to think about the relationships between things. Is this too far forward, or is this too far forward, or is this too far back? Because it gives me the same looking thing if I have a jaw that's actually forward. But in reality, I have found that many times the bigger piece in this is actually that the maxilla is too far backwards. And there's an easy way to treat that. I'm actually my group 4 in my school is actually learning facial bones and how to do all that and how to help crowded teeth. the beginning of April. So we'll be going and doing that then. So let's begin to explore a little bit more. So there's the high palate. So when I have you know what? You know what? I don't want to forget to say this, is that one of the things about the babies is that when there's crowding or when there's compressing of other bones down into the facial bones, down into the palates and stuff, what do? They usually start sucking their thumb or their fingers. You get finger sucks and stuff like that, and sucking their thumb, because what they're trying to do is a sort of like it's totally unconscious. It's not like conscious self-adjustment. They're actually trying to push their own palate up. They're trying to deal with their own tensions within the bones of their head. So something to sort of think about when you're looking at your children or when you're friends, telling your friends and so forth. All right, so let's look at some more pictures so that we can identify what we have going on. So here's the deal. So I may get a little convoluted, and I apologize if I do, so I just wanted to show you how we have, here is the jaw, and here is the palate that I showed you, and I want to show you how there's sinuses at the back. Now these sinuses are covered by your soft palate. These sinuses at the very back of your hard palate. So we have a hard palate, and then we go into having a soft palate, right? Sort of makes you a little choke or something when you get too far back there. And one of the deals is that the soft palate, these are sinuses here in the soft palate. I learned in forever ago when I was in Rolfing school, I learned how to actually release some of the sinus. Like if you feel the pressure is really big in there, you can go in and actually work on those and release those sinuses. So you see how it's in relationship to our palate, right? So we have, let me show you all of the places where we have sinuses. So pardon me for pulling all the different pictures and the different things, but let me show you first of all. Did you know that in your frontal bone, this is the frontal bone here, is that we have a sinus here over the eyes, and you guys know this because you've had pressure, like having sinus headaches, you have pressure. So we have sinuses in my frontal bone, okay? And then here, I'm reaching for my next bone. I should probably get things closer, and you can actually see this. So here is the bone. I'm going to show it to you in two places. This is my sphenoid. This bone here in my skull, I hope I'm not being crazy here, is the back. It's the red bone in the back of the eye orbit. The red bone in the back of the eye orbit. And look at how much of that red bone is here. This is all sphenoid right here, sphenoid. Personally, my opinion is that the sphenoid is the most important bone of the entire body. That's my personal opinion. So your sphenoid is part of your eye orbit here, but look at how we have a sinus here in your sphenoid. There's actually two of them. It's just showing you just one of them. But you have a sinus right going. This is located right here. So you have this sinus that's in your sphenoid, this bone that's at the back of your eyes, okay? So we have sinuses here. We also have sinuses in the cheekbones, in my zygoma, so there's sinuses here. So I have here in the back of in the bone that's in my eye, in my cheekbones, and at the back of my palate. So how about all of those relationships, you guys, is that we have sinuses all in and around my palate as well. And so think about that. Okay, think about that. I tell you that it's very common for people to have the maxilla actually being posterior. What do you think is happening? When the maxilla is posterior, then what's happening is I'm closing some of my sinuses, aren't I? I'm kind of closing off or narrowing my sinus spaces. When my bones of my face and head are not sitting how they're actually supposed to sit, what will happen is that I'm either closing down or narrowing the space that my sinuses sit in. So let's explore a little bit and let me show you here. I'm going to have to get in with you here. Okay. So here's my hard palate with my teeth, right? This is the palate with the teeth. You know that bone that I told you is at the back of your eyes is represented here in orange, the sphenoid, right? The sphenoid. And what's happening here is in between, okay, is this purple bone right here is a bone called your ethmoid bone. I'm going to show it to you. And here's my frontal bone with my sinus right there in my frontal bone. So everybody's pretty close together. Let me show you something. I grabbed it out. Pardon me. I apologize for getting out of here. Okay. So first let me show you the ethmoid bone, which is your major sinus bone here on the skull. You see the yellow bone inside your eye? Let me get it over there. You see the yellow bone that's inside your eye orbit. That guy inside your eye orbit. Let me get my fingers out. That bone is called your ethmoid. And here, your ethmoid is about the size of a walnut. Your ethmoid here, let me hold it up straight. Your ethmoid is about the size of a walnut. See, here, let me hold it sideways. And what it does is, I'll give you a little anatomy lesson. Your ethmoid sits into my frontal bone. See this? Can you see that? Oh God, I can't get this figured out here. Is that my ethmoid is sitting in my frontal bone. And look at how when I hold it just right, and I get it where you can see through these passages. Let me show you the passages. So here's the deal, guys, is that your sinus bone has passages for the sinus fluid to actually pass through. So my sinus fluid is actually supposed to, where does this bone sit? It sits right back here. It sits right in front of my sphenoid, this bone. So all of these sinuses are actually lining up. So one of the deals is, and it's really common, coming through the birth canal especially, or if somebody hits you in the face, or punches you in the nose, or baseball hits you in the face. I've had all of these. And what happens is the ethmoid will move position. When it does that, these troughs that are supposed to be passageways for the sinus fluid to move, what happens is that the sinus fluid actually can't move. So it's these people who can't breathe well when the ethmoid is actually not sitting correctly. Right? So the ethmoid is not sitting correctly, so it doesn't have full passageway for the fluids to actually move through. When the hard palate, as we talked about, let me pull up my little guy here, this hard palate is backwards as I showed, then what also happens is that you have people, because it's blocking some of the air, like some of the sinuses and a bit of the airway, is people will then breathe through their mouths. So a lot of times pulling your maxilla forward and dropping the maxilla opens up the passageways in order for you to breathe more freely, okay? In order for you to breathe more freely. So a lot of what's happening in the face and in the palate and in the sinuses, a lot of what's happening is actually structural. And a lot of the structural stuff is coming through the birth canal. I can't even begin to tell you how much the coming through the birth canal really starts torquing and twisting and turning, especially when you get stuck. Especially when you get stuck. So I have lots of pictures here. This next one is to show you, I want to show you this. This is the ear canal. So this is your inner ear, okay? And what it shows you is how the inner, this drainage line for the fluids in your inner ear. One of the biggest things that happens coming through the birth canal, and it often leads to all of these ear infections, is this brown bone right here is your temporal bone. And down here is this is where your ear is on here. And down through there are the organs of hearing, your little, all those auditory stuff. But also it's got a drainage line through it. It's got a drainage line. It is so common to get this bone, the temporal bone, coming through the birth canal to not be lined up. When it's not lined up, the fluid can't flow. This is all about all of this sinuses and everything, and I'll put a little addendum on it in just a second because I know somebody will say this, is that it's all about the drainage lines being able to flow through. It's about the ability of the body to get rid of or move through fluid. That's one of the biggest things. I tell all the people I've taught over the years is that one of the big things on a very physical level, because there's also working on other levels, but on a very physical level, it's always about getting the body, helping the body to normalize so that fluids can move, whether it's blood, whether it's inner ear fluid, whether it's sinus fluid, whatever it is, it's always about getting the everything lined up for that to go. So I want to show you this. This picture is a great picture, and this really shows you how, here's the septum inside the nose, here is the hard palate, here's the soft palate, this is your throat, the beginning, the beginning of your throat, right here, the beginning of your throat. And so I want to really show you how on a bigger scale, let me close the door, dogs are barking. So here we go, here's the septum and here's the hard palate. So here's your mouth with your tongue and so forth, and how everything is linking into the throat. So not only is my saliva, my food, everything going down my throat, but so is my sinus stuff is going down my throat, but the inner ear is going down the throat. So they're all going down the throat. When there is tensions, misalignments, and all of those things, actually what happens is that the fluids cannot move. The fluids cannot move through, and that is what ultimately we want to help, or we want to try to get to happen. It is just so common for things to happen to our faces and to our heads. It's more common than you realize that create some of these things. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, and I'll just say this, is that within the sinuses, and why sometimes the sinuses don't work, is that people are having allergic reactions or histamine responses, or they're eating foods or something that they're sensitive to. When this is happening, one of the first things that happens is that the sinuses inflame. And once they inflame, it's very difficult obviously for people to breathe. You end up breathing through your mouth, the tremendous amount. So, you can have it where it's a structural thing, or you can have it where it's an inflammatory response, which is something that's not going to, let the passageways be open. So it's about figuring out which. I have a young man client who really has always been a mouth breather. And when I went in, because there is a way to do that, to go in and to open and to help deviated septums and so forth, is once I opened that, he was still mouth breathing. And that's because he's having so many allergic reactions that he is inflamed and swollen within his sinus cavity. So, you have to kind of figure out which is which or what is what. One of the things that's really tough is to get people to change their food. I mean, I know, I get it, I totally get it. But, also to let you know that, there are 5 main pathways to get toxicity and to get waste. Let's say it that way, not just toxicity, but waste out of the body. There's 5 main ways. One is bowel, we know that. One is kidney, bladder, we know that. One is lung, one is liver, and one is skin, okay? So let me say them again. So one is bowel, one is, bladder and kidney, one is liver, lung, and skin. So what happens when those aren't working well is that there are secondary pathways. And I got to tell you, the main first secondary pathway to try to get stuff out of the body when it's in the body and it's backing up is through the sinuses. Huh? So that's another way in which the sinuses can really be involved and get overtaxed and not work as well. So we have structure, we have allergens, and we have more of a backing up, sort of clogging in the body that's now asking the sinuses to do a job. I mean, trying to get everything out through the nose and the sinus cavities and so forth is just like when you have all these other pathways. Think to yourself, I just read something actually in the last couple days that was an article that one doctor said 33% of people actually have some degradation of the kidneys. And then I read another doctor's book not too long ago, and he's thinking that most everybody has something because we've all been dehydrated most of our lives. Well, when these other pathways are having trouble, then we're going to ask something smaller to try to get things out of the body, because the body is always trying to take itself to its most healthy. It's trying to be as healthy as it can, and it can't always do that. So I have lots of pictures, but I just can't think of another thing I want to tell you. So I really appreciate everybody being here with me. Hey, you know what? Message me on what it is you'd like me to talk about next month. I'd love to hear from you guys. And hopefully I've answered any of the questions or enlightened you in a way that you haven't before. Thanks so much.